So for the March 2020 fandom feature, we're going to be talking about an animated film that is truly near and dear to my heart. And the fact that we are celebrating this film's 30th anniversary this year makes it all the more special. And that, of course, is the 1990 Universal and Hanna-Barbera animated film Jetsons The Movie, starring the original voice cast of the Jetsons minus the voice of Elroy, which is Dawes Butler. He was voiced by Patrick Zimmerman in this film, and of course Tiffany voicing Judy Jetson instead of Janet Waldo. But this movie, the fact that it is the only Hanna-Barbera cartoon to actually get an animated film for the big screen, and the fact that they really wanted to make it as authentic as it possibly could have been, minus a brand new, more larger story for the Jetsons, as well as some breakthroughs in CGI technology, they still tried their very best to make sure that this was a truly loved Jetsons movie. And not just that, it came with a little bit of sadness because this was the last time that George O'Hanlon, who voiced George Jetson, and Mel Blanc, the man of 1,000 voices, who voiced Mr. Spacely, would pass away before the film would actually hit theaters. But I also have to give a ton of credit to George O'Hanlon because while he was doing his voice recordings, he suffered a stroke. And it left him blind, and it also gave him a change in his voice, but the fact that he still came to the studio to make sure that he recorded all of his lines was just truly admirable, and I can't thank him enough for it. So Jetsons the Movie is all about America's family that is truly ahead of its time, as they always have been, finding out that George is going to be getting a new job at the Spacely Sprockets and Spindle Orbiting Ore Asteroid, Mr. Spacely's new manufacturing plant for the sake of making cheaper products. And he was been promoted to vice president. So of course, it's a little tough to basically take your family and move, especially with the life that you've built, but also, one of the few things that he doesn't know when he takes this job is the reason as to why he took this job. Because this specific plant of Mr. Spacely's has been suffering a lot of damage, and 4 vice presidents have already picked up and left because they're just afraid to try and figure out what the heck is going on with this plant. But George, of course, is the one that finds out what's going on, and it turns out to be something a lot more than the Jetsons would have ever anticipated. So, this movie does not get the credit that it deserves. There's a lot of people that don't like it, and I just don't understand why. I mean, if there's anything that I could say that I don't like about this movie, especially after seeing it so many times and seeing it recently, it's probably the fact that they got Tiffany to voice Judy Jetson instead of the legendary Janet Waldo, who had voiced Judy since 1962. Now, to be fair, William Hanna and Joseph Barbera, who did in fact direct this movie, did have Janet Waldo at least lend her voice to a different character in this film. Because to not have Janet Waldo, along with all the other surviving cast members, would have just been a sacrilegious moment on Hanna-Barbera's part. Also, the fact that it does have a little bit of a message because in 1990, this was also the time when people were really starting to take a look at early stages and research of climate change and global warming and recycling. So of course there was definitely a lot of messages about safe environments, protecting wildlife, and not interrupting ecosystems. That may be the only 2 things that people would definitely say was not needed in the movie. But the movie itself as a whole is great. It's got really good music, it's just got so much fun in it, the animation is absolutely wonderful, and just seeing the Jetsons in a big budget movie like this is just wonderful to see. I love every little bit of this movie. Even with its imperfections, it's still a great, easy, fun watch, and there's also a great deal of heart in this movie. I really like the messages of family, the messages of looking out for one another. There's even a moment that happens in the Jetsons movie that you never would have expected, and it's just because you didn't see this that often in Hanna-Barbera cartoons. It was really a matter of life and death moment, and and it was just so heartfelt to actually see the emotions of George and Jane and Judy and Elroy when this moment actually takes place and how they truly come together as a family. Oh, and don't get me wrong, I didn't mention them earlier, but Rosie and Astra are in this movie too, of course, and, you know, they're just great. I love Astro to death, and I also really like Mr. Spacely in this movie, even though he really is an asshole. You know, you just can't have the Jetsons without Mr. Spacely, even though he can be a real brute. But it was just fun to see this entire cast of characters with a couple of new additions in this film as well. And I also want to say something for me personally. If this was in fact made to be the series finale of the Jetsons, because that seems to be a trend right now where they make a television series, the television series comes to an end in its run, but then they bring it to the big screen to really put a nice little bow on the whole story. If that was the case for Jetsons the Movie, then just like the family itself, they really were truly ahead of their time, because if this was the actual final story of the Jetsons, it really could have been extremely believable, and especially as someone who has watched all the episodes, saw all the made-for-TV movies, as well as Jetsons Meets the Flintstones, which is also one of my personal favorite, this really was a great way for the Jetsons, especially the original cast, to truly sign off on this monumental staple in pop culture. The one thing that is still really surprising to me is the fact that they've never made a live-action Jetsons film. There were rumors that Robert Rodriguez was going to direct a live-action Jetsons film, and quite frankly, I think that that would have been one of the better ways to do that, because even though he is known for real adult content, don't forget, he did direct all the Spy Kids films, so he definitely has the ability to go into the children's world, but at the same time, especially when it comes to Spy Kids, he truly adds a lot of creative zaniness to his work. Not exactly like Tim Burton, but truly an original kind of creativity, and the Jetsons was an original kind of creativity when it was made back in the 1960s and revitalized in the 1980s for 2 more seasons, so with this movie, what at least it does for me is it just shows me how impactful this show was and how impactful these characters were, and it's also the reason as to why the Jetsons are still my favorite cartoon characters of all time. I love them. I love the show. I have all the Funko Pops from the Jetsons line because I just love the Jetsons. I did an English term paper about George Jetson being one of the greatest father figures of all time, and I stick by that. I love this family so much, and I love this movie to death, regardless of what other people may think about it. So if you've never seen Jetsons the Movie, or if you haven't watched it in a while, I feel as an adult you will appreciate it a little bit more. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's just me. I still love this movie. When I got it on VHS when I was a kid, I must have watched it at least 5 times a day because I loved it so much. But that's it, everybody. Those are my thoughts on Jetsons the Movie. Please leave your comments in the box below, and let's discuss, and I will see you in the next one. Hey, thank you so much for stopping by my channel today. If you're new here and want to see more of what my channel has to offer, please click on the link to my last video, or hit that subscribe button to be kept up to date with all of my uploads. Content of all sorts is posted here quite often, so trust me, you do not want to fall behind. I will see you in the comments, and actions speak louder than words.